Smoke bled from the city all that first week. Not the kind that lifts and vanishes, but a low smear that seemed to take up a home beneath the sky. Ser Barristan Selmy watched it from a slit of a window in the White Sword Tower, the evening light turning the haze the color of old wine. His right side ached where a trident spear had broken against his mail. The ache suited his thoughts. He thought of banners folded and broken, of marrow-white cloaks stained with mud and blood, of oaths that bent and did not quite break. He did not hear Robert until the king was already in the chamber, great shoulders filling the doorway as if halls had been made for him to walk through and split open. Robert wore no crown yet, only a leather jerkin and a red cloak that flared with each step. He smelled of horse and iron and a little of wine, and grief though that had no scent. "I am told you stand when a king enters," Robert said, not unkindly. Barristan rose at once, though the motion made his side sing. "Your Grace." Robert took the chair at his table as if it were a camp stool, and he the same raider who had gone laughing into Rhaegar's crown princes and returned with a ruin and a beginning. "John Arryn says he will return to his mountain," he said. "Take his own house in hand. Has had enough of kinging other men's disputes. Perhaps he thinks the realm will need a steady old pine in the Vale more than a whetstone at my side. I will not fight him. I have enough fights left, and too many of them are with ghosts." Barristan had expected it. He felt it settle like mail on his shoulders. "The realm will need your choices more than your blows, Your Grace." Robert studied him, cheeks rough with new beard, eyes a strange, clear blue. "You are as blunt as they say, Selmy." He bowed his head slightly. "A blunt blade can still kill if driven hard. Gods, you knights and your grim sayings." Robert leaned forward, forearms braced, bracelets clinking. "I want you as my hand for a year, once the smoke clears and the rats crawl back into their holes. Until I can see which faces will be true and which are only waiting to feed." The ache in Barristan's side became a knot. He had expected honors, perhaps. He had not expected this. "Your Grace," he said slowly, and in that pause there were 1,000 small, inconvenient truths. The white cloak, the 7-pointed star he wore on his breast without thought, the taste of ash when he remembered the bodies made small in crimson cloaks at the foot of the throne. A knight of the King's Guard belongs to his king's person, to his bedchamber and his shadow, not the counting house. "Counting can be given to a man who likes it," Robert said. "Sell me. I need a sword that points the right way when men whisper at me. Half of them who call me king want to sit above me by way of favors earned and murders done. You lived among dragons and did not become a dragon. That is what I want in my hand for a little while." "You say for a year," Barristan said. Robert's eyes did not leave his face. "For a year. Then we will see." "If I agree," Barristan said, "I will ask a thing as part of my service." Robert grunted. "Speak." "When Eddard Stark comes," Barristan said, "you will listen to him. You will listen when he speaks of dead children. And when Tywin Lannister comes, you will not let him place a blade in your hand and call it a gift." Robert's mouth made a hard line. "You choose the first of your terms cheaply, Selmy. If Ned tells me the sky is black at noon, I will look up and shade my eyes with a hand. For the rest," he leaned back, breath heavy, "I did not command those murders. You know it. A king is what men do in his name," Barristan said. "If you are to be king, let them know what your name will pay for and what it will refuse." Robert looked past him to the smoked sky. "I will hear you. For a year, I will make myself listen even when I do not like what I hear. Take the chain, Ser Barristan." He had never been a man for jewelry. Chains were for prisoners and dogs, and the hand's badge was both to his thinking. He took it anyway, the links heavy, the hammered little hand cool as riverstone. The weight of it was nothing compared to the weight of the white he had worn for half his life. He bowed his head and felt the king's rough hands settle the chain against his collarbones like a second oath. The small council chamber smelled of old rushes and ink and the faint, cloying perfume of a candle someone had snuffed with gloved fingers. Pycelle's beard made a waterfall over the front of his robes, and he looked smaller than he had when he had murmured in Aerys's court. Varys, in powder and soft slippers, folded himself into a chair with the grace of a cat. Stannis Baratheon was stone with ears. His jaw clenched so hard a vein stood in his temple. He wore a shipwright's salt in his hair and a disdain for the room like armor. Renly stood behind Robert's chair, not yet 16, handsome already, and enjoying being in a room where men who mattered spoke low and listened to themselves. "We need grain," Barristan said, before the talk could run to trophies or titles. "You can hide blood and ash under new banners, but you cannot eat them. The Riverlands have been trampled. The Reach will sell dear unless we show we are not their enemies in winning. Mace Tyrell will feed us if we give him the chance to puff and preen about the bargain for a moon's turn," Stannis said, blunt and bored. "He is a peacock so big, he cannot help but strut whenever a mirror is held up." Robert's mouth quirked. "You see, Selmy? A whetstone that spits sparks. Let Stannis bargain. He understands prices." "I understand ships," Stannis said, "and blockades. Dragonstone still holds." "The Queen Dowager," Varys said softly, "and her son, Prince Viserys," Pycelle corrected, then fluttered when Robert's head turned. I speak only on the old terms, your grace. Do forgive a habit. The boy, Viserys, and Princess Daenerys, if she is born." Barristan set his hands flat on the table. It was an old table. He could feel the cuts and scrapes made by other hands in other tempers. "We do not know if the babe lives. It will be born in a storm," Varys said. "The fishermen on Driftmark say so, and fishermen are often better prophets than septons. Storms strip showy trees and leave the stunted ones. I confess no love for prophecy myself. It muddles the taste of wine." Robert rubbed at his brow. "Stannis, you will take the fleet there. If the child is born, let it be born under a Baratheon's guns." "And if the child is born," Stannis said, without changing his face by a hair, "what does your grace command I do with it?" Robert's mouth opened and closed. In that pause, all the men in the room looked to Barristan. He had not asked for that. It came anyway with the chain. He remembered two little things wrapped in crimson cloaks and presented like meat. He remembered Rhaegar's son playing in a tower corridor with a wooden knight that had a strawberry shape where a shield should be. "You take the Queen Dowager alive if you can," Barristan said, voice even. "You hold the children alive. You bring them to King's Landing if you can do it safely. If not safely, you keep them somewhere they will not flee and they will not be killed." Varys's eyes half closed, pewter lids lowering, as if he were listening to music only he could hear. Stannis looked from Robert to Barristan and back again and nodded once without warmth. "Very good, Hand," he said, the word not quite insult and not quite approval. "I will do what I can, and if I cannot I will say so plainly." After the council, Tywin Lannister came to court as if called by the scent of blood drying. His standard arrived first, the lion bright despite ash and dust, and then his household, crimson in file, like a clot traveling through a body. Jaime walked near the front with the other white cloak, gold head bare, a queer look on his face as if the stones of the red keep themselves had begun to tell jokes in a tongue only he understood. Barristan met Tywin in the throne room with Robert on the high seat and courtiers thick along the walls, eyes as greedy as crows. Tywin knelt as if bending were a military maneuver performed to exact measure. He rose smoother than any of the dancers in the Street of Silk. "Your Grace," Tywin said, and he did not look at the hand. "The lion comes as he has always come when the kings of Westeros called. He brings you all he has taken from a false king's house. He brings you peace." Barristan's hand closed over the chair's carved arm. "What he brought," he said, so quietly that several lords on the far side of the hall leaned in to hear, "was the murder of a little girl and a little boy." Jaime's head snapped toward him before his father's did. Robert's fingers tightened on the arm of the throne. Tywin did not blink. "War is a butcher's work, Ser Barristan," he said. "When it is done, I prefer to be the man who cleans and salts the meat. Your Grace, I offer you what all kings desire. Quiet. The lions have laid down the heads of the last of the dragon's hatchlings, so your peace will be unchallenged." "Last," Barristan said. "There are still 2 on Dragonstone. And it is not for lords to choose which of a king's enemies' children live and die by private knife. If your grace keeps a court, let it be a court where guilt is named before justice is done." The hall breathed in as one. Robert's color rose and then steadied. "Tywin," he said slowly, "you have my thanks for your banners and your swords, and my disgust for the manner of it. Tell me you did not command the children killed." Tywin's gaze was as lovely and as cold as a statue's. "I commanded the city taken. Those who took it thoroughly. Doors do not open with kisses." "Names," Barristan said. "If the murders were not yours, name the men who did them, that the king may judge them." Tywin's mouth curved by a fraction. "Ser Amory Lorch," he said, "and Ser Gregor Clegane, zealous men. I did not tell them to do what they did. They were overbold refutations of loyalty. You are welcome to put them to question if your grace believes it prudent for his peace to salt the fields of his newest friends in the west." "Send them to the city," Robert said abruptly. "Let them answer a king's questions." "I will send for Gregor," Tywin said, as if speaking of a hawk, not a man. "If he can be called from his duties. The realm has many wolves. It is good to have some hounds." Jaime looked as if he might speak. He did not. Barristan watched the flicker of it cross the younger man's face and die. He watched Robert's head tilt, calculation and weariness at war in his eyes, and saw exactly the moment the king measured the casks of gold under Casterly Rock against 2 dead children and chose not to break a realm he had just won. That choice etched itself in Robert's face like a cut made by his own crown. Afterward, in the anteroom where the air was cooler and smelled of stone rather than sweat, Jaime drifted to him. "Ser Barristan," he said, "congratulations. I suppose I will have to answer my lord hand if you ask me the time of day." "You will answer as your oath requires," Barristan said. Jaime's lip quirked. "Ah, oaths. I think of little else. I expected the old man to throw them at me today and demand my white back." "Your father wants a different white for you," Barristan said. "I think you know that. And the king denies him because it pleases the king to make him wait." Jaime leaned one shoulder against the wall, careless and lovely and sharp. "Do you mean to summon the mountain to the city?" "I have already requested it of Lord Tywin," Barristan said. "And I have named to the king that justice done by the crown would ease Dorne. There has been enough burning." Jaime's green eyes, lighter than a lion's, watched him. "You always believe that justice is a fire to warm, not a blaze to consume. I wonder if the world will let you keep believing it." Barristan did not answer him. He did not bother to tell him that the world did not need to let him do anything. He would simply go on doing it for as long as breath filled his chest. When Eddard Stark came down from the trident with Lyanna's bones, he came like a weather change. Quiet, inexorable, cooling tempers he touched and hardening others he could not. He looked at the wrapped bundle Tywin's men had dragged into the throne room days before and closed his eyes. Barristan wished he had found a way to take that sight from the man. They spoke in the tower as the city coughed and rebuilt outside. "Jon Arryn goes back to the Eyrie," Ned said. "I cannot fault him. He has his own duties." "Ihemine." "You have them because your hopes died," Barristan said, not harshly. Ned's mouth thinned. "They were not mine alone." "I will do what a hand can," Barristan said. "For the living. Stannis sails for Dragonstone within the week. I will go with him." Ned lifted a brow. "You leave the city? A white cloak is not only for halls," Barristan said. "I will be nearer to doing good there than here while Tywin Lannister stalks our steps like a shadow with a purse full of answers." Ned looked at him for a time. "Robert trusts you." "For a year," Barristan said. "That might be enough," Ned answered. "If you use it." He hesitated. "He will want the children dead. I will not carry that order." "You could refuse," Ned said softly. "And a king could choose to make an example of his hand. Then the realm will watch you die and learn a lesson you did not mean to teach." He shifted the bundle in his arms. "I do not want more graves." "Nor I," Barristan said. "That is why I will go. And why I will return, if I can, with something that is not a pair of small bloody parcels. The fleet that sailed for Dragonstone was a rough-stitched cloak of ships, royal galleys whose paint was scuffed and their oarsmen tired, stormland cogs whose masters knew the wind like wives, and 3 sleek, pale things from the arbor whose captains drank with Stannis and kept their opinions to themselves. The narrow sea had the flat, dull shine of polished metal. Clouds built in stacks out of the east. Barristan felt more himself on a deck than he had in a hall. He kept his white cloak folded in a chest and wore a plain surcoat with the 7-pointed star stitched small and discreet. He stood beside Stannis more than he sat, because Stannis did not sit unless his body had no other choice. The younger Baratheon's face went salt-tight as he watched the sky. When the storm struck, it came all at once, like a thrown cloak. They rode it under shortened sail. The world became wind and white water. Men prayed to every god they had heard of and a few that had no names. Barristan strapped himself into life with simple knots and rode the plunge and heave of the deck. Thinking absurdly of a tourney he had won as a boy where the tiltyard's dust had jumped like torn silk around the hooves. On the 3rd day the clouds lifted as if a hand had been taken off his head. The sky looked scoured. Dragonstone stood on the sea like a fist. The port lay half under the waterline, piers broken, bad work made worse by wind. Stannis put men ashore in small boats. A red banner flew from a tower on the outer wall and did not fall when a bolt thudded into it. Someone answered the hail horn in a thin voice, too strained to carry sense. The fortress held for another day and night, as if stubbornness were mortar. Then the gate opened and a procession came down the causeway under a white rag tied to a length of driftwood. Pyres built days ago still smoldered in corners. The first man out was as old as driftwood and gaunt with hunger, one hand on a young boy's shoulder. Behind him, a laundress carried something that mewled when the wind shifted. "Lord Stannis," the old knight croaked. His accent had the smoothness of summer sea. "Monterys Valerion of Driftmark yields Dragonstone in the Queen Dowager's name." "Monterys," Stannis said. "I know you. Where is she?" "In the Sept," Valerion said. "She labored 3 days and nights. The babe came at dawn." He took a breath that seemed to scrape his ribs. The Queen Dowager did not wake again. The little thing the laundress carried made the same small wrong sound. It was not hungry. It was furious, small and outraged that the world had put cold and light around it. Barristan did not know why that made him want to laugh and bow all at once. Stannis nodded once, as if to a figure on a ledger. "The boy is Prince Viserys," he said, not making a prince's courtesy out of it. "The girl is Daenerys." He dropped his gaze to the old knight. "You yield to a king's hand." Valerion's mouth twisted. "I yield to a storm I cannot fight, but I yield her body to the faith." He straightened, old and suddenly not so old. "She was the mother of kings, Stannis Baratheon. You will not throw her bones on a midden. Not while Monterys Valerion draws breath. You will have the respect owed a Queen Dowager's corpse," Stannis said, flat. "We will burn no women here today." He looked to Barristan. "Take the children." Barristan did not hesitate. He went forward and took the boy first because that seemed right. Viserys Targaryen looked back at him with eyes too large in his pinched face. They were not purple, not in truth, but a pale, washed shade that could look like anything beneath different skies. The boy's hands were cold and surprisingly clean. When Barristan turned to the laundress, the newborn's face was a little crumpled persimmon of a thing with a mouth that already knew how to protest. She hissed when the wind struck her and then quieted when the laundress's scent faded. "Come," Barristan said quietly to the boy. "You will not be harmed." He felt the lie in his own words. He did not call it such. He did not know what would be. He done. He only knew what he intended to try. They carried Rhaella Targaryen into the square on a bier of rough plank. She looked nothing like a queen. The Septon who had been caught in the siege, as if it were a net, sprinkled her with water Stannis's men had boiled and blessed that morning. No words were said aloud about fathers and brothers and sons. The wind said them for all. The voyage back was calmer until they reached the mouth of the Blackwater, where the smell of smoke hung in the air as if the city had learned to breathe tar. Hundreds flocked to the quay when word flew ahead that living dragons had come in a boat. They were a crowd like any other crowd, half hoping for miracles, half wanting to see wickedness punished, half wanting to be part of a thing they could retell until it became legend in their own mouths. Robert received them in the great hall. Tywin had taken himself back to the west for a time. The court breathed easier when his shadow left, as if someone had opened a shutter. Varys stood near the base of the throne, Pycelle near him, eyes wet as if the smell of fish moved him to tears. Jaime stood in white like winter. Viserys did not cry. He stood beside Barristan and clutched his hand until his small knuckles turned white. The newborn slept, as newborns do in the middle of storms and feasts and wars and quiet rooms, without regard for men's pretense. "You have brought me trouble," Robert said, without rancor and without warmth. "I have brought you a choice," Barristan said. Ned stood to the side of the hall, his face as steady as stone. Stannis came forward and stopped, a note lower than courtesy. "Dragonstone is yours," he told his brother. "The Queen Dowager is dead. These live." Their living made a sound like surf in the hall. Barristan picked it out. The hiss of a woman drawing breath to curse, the laugh of a young lord who thought himself brave at someone else's risk, the scrape of a sword hilt on leather because a captain of the guard shifted and set his stance more firmly. Robert rose. "A year ago," he said, "I thought my life would be Lyanna and war and feasting to remember it by. Today I have a kingdom full of men who want rewards. And now I have 2 dragon spawn shoved under my nose like a jester's trick. There is nothing in this siege-scarred hall that was in my songs." He took 2 steps down. "Hand, what would you have me do?" "Spare them," Barristan said, as if it were the simplest thing under the sun. He knew the weight of it. He knew the sound in the hall changed again like wind turning. "Send them where they can do no harm. Make your enemies' children a promise that the 7 themselves would recognize. Dorne watches. The Reach listens. If you begin your reign with clemency, you give men a reason to come to you besides fear of your hammer." "A promise," Robert said, tasting the word. "Do you promise me quiet in return?" "I promise you that the quiet you buy with heads now will be brief," Barristan said. "Kill these 2 and there will be men who make legends of them before their blood dries. Spare them and there will be men who call you weak. Choose which men you prefer." Varys folded his hands. "The faith has given many princes sanctuary in days long past. The Great September would welcome an opportunity to show the realm that the 7 stand with the new king. Sanctuary cannot be lightly broken without cost in hearts." "Sanctuary," Robert said, with contempt and yearning in equal parts. "The last time a Septon blessed me, I was still a boy and had not killed a man I liked. Pycelle, if I put the dragon whelps in your grandfather's god's house, can you keep them from turning into banners for fools to march behind?" Pycelle dabbed his eyes. "Sanctuary is sanctuary," he said grandly. "It is not comfort. It is confinement and prayer and very little meat. Can be made less comfortable still. Your grace would have the faith's gratitude." "And little else," Stannis said. "But it would keep your hands clean." A hiss of breath from Ned was not disapproval. It was something like relief. Barristan did not look at him. He looked at Robert's big hands, which had once wrapped around a warhammer haft, not a scepter. "Give them to the Great September," Robert said abruptly. "Let the godly lock them behind 7 doors and keep watch over them like the old stories." He took the last step down. "Selmy, hear me. If a whisper of plots reaches me out of that sept, if a single fool tries to use those children to unfurl a Gyrony dragon over any roof in my realm, I will go to that sept myself and carry them out by their hair." "You will not need to," Barristan said, "because we will hear the whispers first, and because I will stand between them and any banners." Robert made a face as if at sour wine. "All right." He looked at Viserys. "Boy, if ever you give me cause to regret this day, I will forget I liked your sister's hair." He turned and strode back to his throne as if his life might be simpler if he could outrun his own words. That afternoon, the High Septon came in procession with 12 acolytes, and the hall went still in a different way. Barristan walked with him to the great September of Baylor through streets where people pressed forward to see and then shrank back again when they saw the white cloaks and the king's guardsmen ringed around the little party. Viserys did not speak. He held himself the way hungry boys do, as if a wind is moving them from behind. The baby slept, woke and wailed, burrowed into Barristan's surcoat, and slept again. In the sept, the light fell like pale coins through the high-colored glass. The high septon touched the boy's hair and then the infant's brow. "As long as they remain within these walls," he said, loud enough for the gathered to carry the words to every corner of the city by nightfall. "They are under the Seven's protection. They will be taught their letters, their prayers, and the emptiness of crowns without the grace to wear them. Teach them also the cost of crowns," Barristan said. He placed the girl in the arms of an acolyte who looked as if he had never in his life held anything as soft. His white cloak itched between his shoulder blades. He looked at the boy. Viserys. The boy met his gaze with the brittle boldness of the desperate. "My father was a king. And dead," Barristan said plainly. "You and your sister live because a man you thought your enemy used a word called mercy. Learn what it means. One day it may be the only sword you have." He did not know why he said sword, when the boy was thin as a reed and had hands like a scribe. Outside, the city had already turned the news into 3 different stories. That Robert had embraced the boy and the baby and called them niece and nephew, that he had spat at them and flung them at the sept doors, that he had wept. Each of those stories found ears that wanted them. Each of them was untrue. Tywin Lannister returned in a month with angled courtesy and a pair of letters from the west that dripped honey and threats. In the first small council after, he stood with a smile that did not reach his eyes and listened while Barristan announced new coin tax rebates for the crownlands to pay for repairs and reduced levies in the riverlands to allow harvests to be sown without emptying villages. When the matter turned to the summons for Gregor and Amory Lorch, Tywin's hand moved once, a centipede of gold catching the candlelight. "Ser Amory has vanished on his way to the city," Tywin said. "It seems the wolves in the Trident country have acquired a taste for man's flesh. I warned him not to travel with a small escort." "And Clegane?" Barristan asked. "Busy," Tywin said, "putting down raiders in the passes. I will not have your roads choked by lawless men, Lord Hand." He paused, savoring the address. "My men will send the mountain when the mountains can spare him." "Send him," Robert said, with a patience that made Stannis look in open surprise at his brother. "The hand does not ask softly twice." Tywin's mouth quirked. "Of course," he said. "In the meantime, your grace, may I suggest a way to put the talk from the sept to bed? A bride for a king quiets all manner of buzzing." The air went close again. The room held its breath differently when Tywin Lannister named a woman. "Your daughter," Robert said, not a question. "Cersei," Tywin said, "a queen suitable to be painted on temple walls. She brings beauty and an alliance with a house that has always served kings." Pycelle coughed into his beard. Varys looked down at his hands as if they had become interesting. Stannis lifted a brow that meant he wanted to say that House Lannister had not always served kings but would not spend his breath because he had burnt through his store the last time he had shouted at a storm. Barristan thought of Elia of Dorne and her children. He thought of Dornish blood calling for justice aloud even when it spoke with courtesy. He weighed Tywin's calm against Oberyn Martell's known temper. He thought of the city watch, their half-worn boots, their thin pay. The way a man can be bought for a single act he will tell himself does not matter if his children eat off the plate it purchased. "Your Grace," he said, "you could make a match that will bind old wounds and not open new ones. The Reach gave your enemy bread and steel until you took them. Feed them now and they will call you king with more than their lips. The West will be yours soon enough without a wedding. They have no other king to trim their lanterns by." Tywin's head turned toward him very slightly. The look that passed across his face was not anger. It was a ledger adding a new column. Robert rubbed at his jaw. "Who in the Reach? House Redwine would send you wine until you drowned in it," Stannis said, dry. "And their fleet would be happy to be yours instead of the Tyrells." A florent would give you half her house's pride and all of its banners for the chance to be first under a new king's son. Robert's mouth made a shape that was almost laughter. A florent, he said. Gods, would that make me kin to a fox? I suppose I like a fox better than a lion. They eat what they need. Tywin did not change his expression. Barristan could feel the pulse of the room altering, the silk of it catching on callus. He knew how the West's gold ran like water under the city's walls, even if men pretended not to hear the sound. He knew how much easier certain things became when a king tied himself to a house that set cups of wine beside every bargain. He also knew what Lannister pride did when denied. When the council broke, Varys drifted into Barristan's path like smoke. "You play the lion and the stag against the grape and the port," he murmured. "A game to entertain a court." "I am not entertained," Barristan said. "Nor am I," Varys said, eyes heavy-lidded and amused. "One does not need to enjoy one's work to do it well. Be careful with Lord Tywin. He has a way of changing the shape of things without seeming to touch them. One day you will wake, and the road you thought you were on will have taken a turn of which you were not informed." "And you?" Barristan asked. "When I wake, will I find you where I left you?" "If you left me in the shadows," Varys said. "Yes." The city began to behave as cities do when war ends and men decide to trust the next day a little. The reek of the slaughterhouse quarters returned to the useful stink of meat. The fish market once more called dawn out of sleep with its rough wit. The dragon pit remained a black broken tooth against the sky, and out-of-work masons came and squinted at it and argued about whether a thing so ruined should be left in peace or taken down and turned into tiles. A singer wrote a song about the mercy shown to dragon babes and played it under balconies for 2 nights before a brick missed Varys by a foot and taught him the city did not always enjoy hearing about mercy. Inside the Great September, Viserys learned to read by candlelight from a septon who treated him as he treated any boy. The small prince rarely smiled. He had already learned what hunger teaches and wanted something he could not name. He told himself the name was crown and the thing a chair of ugly black swords, because he had no other words for wanting to be safe. The girl did what babies do. She learned to fix her eyes on faces. She learned that voices meant food. Sometimes, when Barristan stood very still and let her small hand curl around his finger, he told himself she was the easiest of all the realm's problems to solve. Let her live. Tywin's answer to the slight came as quietly as a new spiderweb on a lintel. Gregor did not come to King's Landing. Raiders appeared in the red mountains of Dorne. Men out of nowhere with no banners who burned olive groves and carried off girls and then vanished. Dornish envoys arrived at court with mouths like knives. Doran Martell wrote a letter that praised Robert's mercy in lines thin as a reed and asked when the men who murdered his sister's children would answer a king's questions as he had once asked, with more words and fewer teeth. Oberyn Martell did not write. He came. He rode into the city with 6 spears behind him and a smile like a crescent blade. His face was a map of the South, all sun and shadow. He kissed the air in front of Cersei Lannister's forehead on the day she curtsied to the king and pretended not to notice that Robert looked past her to any memory that did not hurt. The queen's wedding had happened in a hurry after all. The king waking one morning not sober and deciding that a lion's gold would make a crown sit easier. Barristan had known better than to weigh the moment down with old arguments. A hand gives counsel until the king tires of hearing it. Oberyn asked to see the sanctuary children. The High Septon refused as a matter of routine and of pride. The prince smiled and said he would wait. He did not wait sitting. He watched the training yards and drank with any knight who could be tricked into losing coin, and he found the one tavern in Flea Bottom where a minstrel could make a decent soup. He laughed with Jaime Lannister in a corner and told him a story that made Jaime look at his own hands with a peculiar expression, as if he had only just noticed the shape of his knuckles. When at last the High Septon allowed him to cross the Sept's threshold, Barristan walked with him. "You saved them," Oberyn said under his breath, when the Sept's door closed. His eyes were half-lidded against the colored light. "You personally, not the king." "The king listened," Barristan said. "Only to you," Oberyn said. "Why?" "Because he remembers who I have been," Barristan said. Because he remembers a field he won and a wound I took. Because his dead friend asked him to listen to me. He did not name Ned Stark a friend aloud. He did not know if that would help the living man or set a weight on his back. Eddard had gone north with his bones and his promise and a look in his eyes that said loyalty can sometimes be the easiest choice and sometimes be the hardest. Oberyn knelt, not ungraceful, and looked at the little girl as she slept. "She has her brother's mouth," he said softly. "Poor Elia." Barristan watched him carefully. "You came to see if I had made a pet of them," he said. "If I had taken them under my cloak and imagined myself a sort of father." Oberyn smiled backward over his shoulder. "I came to see the quality of your mercy." He rose. "I do not mistake you, Selmy. You are the sharpest of blunt swords. You will use mercy as a weapon if you can." "I will use any weapon that kills fewer than it saves," Barristan said. "Good," Oberyn said, and for a moment the word was free of venom. His eyes glittered. "If ever you need a knife that speaks when it cuts, send for me. Plots have sound if you know how to listen." The first whisper came from Jacelyn Bywater, whom Barristan had given command of the city watch because he had watched the man lose 2 fingers in a skirmish at the Mudgate and not drop the halberd. Bywater's voice was a rasp from a throat scar. He was not a man for needlework words. "For men tried to go over the Sept's rear wall last night," he said. "They made the sort of mistakes that mean someone wanted them to be caught. The sort that lead their confessions to a certain name," Barristan said, seating himself slowly because he had learned that making a man wait for your words and not for your movements made him less angry. "Gregor," Bywater said, "which is clever, because he is where the hand cannot reach." "Take them to the black cells," Barristan said. "They will sweat as well there as anywhere. Feed them just enough. Let them learn they are not important." He paused. "Choose one and bring him up quietly. I will ask him questions myself." The man they brought up was pale with the idea of being beneath the city. The worst prisons live in a man's mind long before he is thrown in them. His hands shook. He told his false tale twice before he told the true one. There had been coin. There had been a priest of the Mother with quiet eyes who had asked where the Sept's back gate was on a morning when no one important would see. There had been a hand that smelled of sand. Not the speech of the West, of the Dornish and the Stormlands both. Barristan did not believe in chance. But he did believe that Tywin Lannister would not risk open war with Dorne over a pair of children when he could weaken a hand by making it seem as if Dorne could not be satisfied by mercy. He believed in Varys's warnings as far as they went and then stopped believing them abruptly where they served Varys more than anyone else. He went to Jaime with what Bywater had gathered because Jaime had the peculiar quality of being ruthless and yet unable to let certain lines be crossed in his sight. The young lion listened with amusement and something like sadness. "You want me to stand in the Sept like a passerby and watch for men who want to climb a wall with a rope in their teeth," Jaime said. "Do you want me to bring my sword, or will a shepherd's crook do?" "Bring your sword," Barristan said, "but bring someone else's eyes. You cannot keep all the watch by yourself. And do not let your father hear you are doing this." Jaime's mouth flattened. "He hears everything he cares to," he said. "Very well, we will do it. I will consider it practice for standing guard over idiocy. I have some experience in that already." The next attempt came 3 nights later, and it did not come over a wall. It came with a cartload of rushes for the Sept's floors and a whistling boy whose tune had no rhythm. When Bywater's men stopped it, the driver laughed and pulled back a blanket to show bolts of linen no one had asked for. Jaime stepped into the shadow of the cart and leaned as if to scratch his knee. When the third man pushed up from beneath the rushes, he did not rise quickly enough. The sword that took his hand belonged to a man who had once sworn to protect kings and had taken that oath, finally, the strangest sort of seriously. 3 of them died in the street. The boy was hardly older than Renly. He cried as if his mother's name had been the code word to stop the killing, and no one had told her to speak it. Barristan watched the blood run away between cobbles, and he weighed mercy against fear, and he knew that it was not enough to build a realm, but it was one of the few stones he trusted to lay. On the day Robert married Cersei, bells rang long enough to drown out most questions. Barristan stood white and still beside the royal couple and felt the queen's gaze slide sideways over him and away as if he were furniture. He had seen the look before on the faces of ladies who learned that certain chairs could not be moved. Robert held his bride's hand and looked as if he wanted it to be another, and afterward he drank until his words rolled together like surf. When the last cup tipped and the last vow was spoken, Barristan climbed the white sword tower and sat where the air could scrape out whatever the bells had left in him. Jaime came, far quieter than any man in Lannister crimson should be. "You saved them again," he said. A septon told everyone at the feast. Apparently the mother herself reached down, took a thief by the scruff and said, "No." His grin was brief and oddly boyish. "You would make a fine god, Selmy. Your temples would be clean and your prayers would be brief." "I would rather live where gods do not need temples," Barristan said. "We do not get to choose the world," Jaime said. "Only our corners of it." He leaned his back against the parapet. "You cannot guard them forever." "No," Barristan said. "And if the king changes his mind next year?" Jaime asked, studying him as if he were a piece on the Sivas board that had moved itself. "If his fancy for mercy is blown out like a candle, then I will ask him to let me put the light back," Barristan said. "And if he refuses, I will find where the dark goes and stand there with a sword." Jaime laughed softly. "You and your swords. Very well. I hope I am not the thing you end up cutting." Barristan did not think he would cut Jaime. He had watched the light change in the younger man's eyes when the boy screamed beneath the cart. He knew where the edges were that Jaime Lannister would not step over, even if Jaime himself refused to name them. In the 8th month of Robert's first year, word came from the west that Gregor Clegane had met with some accident on a hunt that kept him from traveling. In the 9th month, Dornish raiders who had not existed in the 6th vanished in the 10th after Bywater found a warehouse by the Mud Gate with enough salted beef to feed 2 small raiding parties a winter. In the 11th, the first harvest wagons reached the city full enough to make bakers argue about prices instead of slices. In the 12th, Barristan woke one morning with the clear, unhelpful thought that his year had nearly run out. He went to the sept before dawn. The air inside still seemed cooler than the streets, as if the gods kept their own weather. The girl was toddling by then, a stooping little progression from pillar to pillar with a determination that might have made a better city than any king could. The boy read, lips moving. He looked up when Barristan stopped near him, wary, proud, hungry. "You will be a man soon," Barristan said. "I am a prince," the boy answered. It was not arrogant. It was a defense against a world that had not yet told him who he was allowed to be. "Perhaps," Barristan said. "Perhaps not. But you can be a man either way." He paused. "If you are ever offered a choice between wearing a crown on a head bent to it and standing straight without one, choose your spine. It will carry you longer." The boy frowned at him. "A crown is a spine," he said, stubborn and wrong and exactly the age he was. Barristan smiled then and could not help it. "Sometimes," he said, "sometimes it is only a collar that looks like a crown." He left the sept and took the long way back to the Red Keep, not because he had business on the Street of Sisters or because he wanted to see if the fishmongers had better oysters than last week. He wanted to put the city under his boots, to feel it breathe, to remind himself that this was what he had attempted to preserve with a word spoken at the right hour before the wrong king. He saw a young mother rocking a baby in a doorway and thought of the queen who had died in a fortress of black stone. And he thought of the queen who had survived her wedding night with a smile that did not crack. And he wondered what shape queens made of themselves when left alone with their thoughts. At the top of the stairs to the council chamber, Robert caught him by the sleeve. The king was not drunk. The fact was as startling as a winter rose. "I said a year," he said, like a man who had finally remembered something he had promised because it would not let him forget. "You have done what I asked." "I have done what I could," Barristan said. "I married a lion," Robert said. "I did not plan it. I did not plan any of this. But I did not throw a kingdom away either. You kept me from throwing bits of it I would have missed later." His mouth did a small, rueful thing. "You kept me from killing babies." You kept yourself from it, Barristan said. Robert shook his head. No. Do not give me balm I haven't earned. All right, hand. For your year, what do you ask? The question surprised him. He had his answer at once. Keep your word to them, Barristan said. Let them grow. Let the sept keep them. Let the realm see that your word, however grudgingly given, holds. Robert grunted. You do not ask me for a castle or a chain or my wife's better graces. I ask you for the only thing you can give that will matter when I am bones, Barristan said. Keep them alive. Robert looked at him for a long time. All right, he said. All right. And you? Will you keep being my blunt blade? Past the year. Barristan could have refused and made of his year a sort of legend. I came into a black hall and pulled 2 lives out of it and left behind a promise to keep them breathing. He had never wanted to be a legend. Legends burn, and when they are gone, there is nothing left you can eat. I will serve, he said, until I cannot. Good, Robert said, and clapped him on the shoulder hard enough to make his ribs protest. Stay. Stay and remind me of the things I don't want to hear. Gods, I hate you for it. And love me for it, Barristan said, easy as if they were boys. Robert laughed then. The sound had a rasp in it and some emptiness too. But it was true laughter. In the days after, Tywin Lannister sent more gifts and fewer answers. Doran Martell's letters learned to say thank you without making it sound like a surrender. Stannis drilled the fleet as if he were trying to wear the sea down to something that would accept his shape. Jaime stood sometimes in the square in front of the sept and looked up at the stone as if it might tell him who he was. The queen learned the city's corners and which faces bowed properly and which would need to be taught. She learned the king's habits and how to make him forget his own questions with a cup or with silence. Varys continued to drift. Pycelle continued to sit and sneeze and advise and survive. Jon Arryn wrote from the Vale with careful sentences that did not say he was glad to be gone. Ned Stark sent no letters. He built a blank wall of years and snow and boys in the north. And Barristan Selmy, the white sword who wore a hand's chain and walked with it as if it might yet turn into something useful, knew what he had done and what he had not. He had not broken Tywin Lannister's pride. He had not ripened Robert Baratheon into a husband who remembered every promise he made when sober. He had not brought back every child a door had slammed on. But in the first year of a new king's reign, he had gone to a black fortress in a storm and lifted 2 small lives out of a place where the world had decided they might fall. He had made mercy into a word men spoke in court with less shame. He had stood in front of a sept door and set men with swords to keep other men with swords from turning politics into blood. It was not everything. It would never be everything. But it was a beginning. On an evening when the sky had taken the color of burnt sugar, he walked again to the window of the White Sword Tower and looked at a city that no longer wore its smoke like a mask. He pressed a finger to the glass, foolishly, and drew a line. It meant nothing, pleased him to see it. He thought of the boy reading with his lips moving and of the girl who would soon run between pillars like a little speck of light. He thought of a king who asked and, once in a while, listened. He thought of swords and chains, and the ways men try to be good in rooms that do not make it easy. And he thought quietly, without pride and without despair. For a year this was in my hand. Then he turned and went down and took up the work again.